What happens when royal privilege meets television reality? In just 12 seconds, one heated comment would transform a friendly chat show appearance into the most shocking celebrity meltdown ever caught on camera. Last night, behind the glittering lights of the Graham Norton show, viewers witnessed an explosive confrontation that nobody saw coming. This is the exclusive inside story of how Prince Harry went from charming guest to entitled antagonist, leaving the beloved host with no choice but to do the unthinkable. The evening started like any other Friday night taping. Graham Norton, the master of celebrity charm, was preparing for what promised to be another delightful show. The guest lineup looked perfect on paper: a Hollywood actress promoting her latest film, a comedian fresh off his sold-out tour, and Prince Harry discussing his new charitable foundation. The audience was buzzing with excitement, phones switched off, cameras rolling. Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the Graham Norton Show. Graham beamed at the cameras, his signature warmth filling the studio. Tonight we have an absolutely fantastic lineup for you. As the opening credits rolled, everything seemed normal. The first two guests were seated comfortably on the famous red sofa, chatting easily with Graham about their recent projects. The atmosphere was light, filled with the usual Norton magic that had made him Britain's most beloved talk show host for over 2 decades. Then Prince Harry walked onto the set. The audience erupted in applause as he made his entrance, waving confidently to the crowd. He looked polished in his navy suit, every inch the royal charmer that had won hearts around the world. Graham stood to greet him with his usual enthusiasm. "Your Royal Highness, wonderful to have you here tonight," Graham said, extending his hand for a warm handshake. But something was different. Instead of the expected gracious response, Harry's handshake was brief, almost dismissive. "Just Harry is fine," he said, his tone already carrying an edge that made Graham's smile falter slightly. "Of course, Harry, it is then." Graham recovered smoothly, gesturing toward the sofa. "Please, take a seat and make yourself comfortable." The other guests shifted slightly to make room, but Harry seemed to pause, looking at the seating arrangement with visible irritation. "Actually, I was told I'd have the end seat," he said, loud enough for the studio microphones to pick up clearly. Graham blinked, maintaining his professional composure. "Oh well, we can certainly arrange that if you prefer. Sarah, would you mind sliding down just a touch?" The Hollywood actress, Sarah Matthews, smiled graciously and moved without complaint. "Of course, no problem at all," she said cheerfully. But Harry wasn't finished. As he finally sat down, he looked around the set with what could only be described as disdain. "This lighting is quite harsh, isn't it? I specifically requested softer lighting in my contract rider." The studio audience began to murmur quietly among themselves. This wasn't the Harry they expected. Graham, ever the professional, tried to lighten the mood with humor. "Well, harsh lighting is rather the curse of television, I'm afraid. Makes us all look like we need a good holiday," he chuckled, hoping to get a smile from his difficult guest. Harry didn't laugh. Instead, he adjusted his position on the sofa again, this time more dramatically. "I suppose that's acceptable for most people, but given my position, I would have thought more consideration might have been given." The temperature in the room seemed to drop several degrees. The other guests exchanged glances, clearly uncomfortable with the sudden tension. Graham's famous quick wit kicked into gear. "Well, your position on the sofa looks quite comfortable to me," he said with a grin, trying once again to inject some levity into the increasingly awkward situation. This time, Harry's response was sharp and immediate. "That's not what I meant, and I think you know that perfectly well." The audience fell completely silent. In all his years of hosting, Graham Norton had never encountered such blatant rudeness from a guest, especially not within the first few minutes of an interview. But true to his reputation, he pressed on. "Right then, shall we talk about your new foundation? I understand it's focused on supporting military veterans, which is absolutely wonderful work." For a moment, it seemed like Harry might settle into a normal interview rhythm. He straightened up slightly and began to speak about the charitable organization. "Yes, it's something very close to my heart. Having served myself, I understand the unique challenges that veterans face when transitioning back to civilian life." Graham nodded encouragingly. "That's really admirable work. Can you tell us about some of the specific programs you're developing?" "Well," Harry began, but then he paused, looking irritated again. "Actually, before we continue, could someone do something about that audience member with the cough? It's quite distracting." Graham turned toward the audience, genuinely confused. "I'm sorry, which audience member?" "The woman in the third row. She's been coughing intermittently since I sat down. It's making it very difficult to concentrate." The camera operator, following Graham's lead, panned briefly toward the audience. A middle-aged woman sat looking mortified, her hand covering her mouth. She had indeed coughed once or twice. Completely normal behavior for someone sitting in a television studio for over an hour. Graham's expression began to show the first signs of strain. "I'm terribly sorry, but I think that's just normal audience behavior. Perhaps we could just continue with the interview?" "Normal for your usual guests, perhaps," Harry replied coolly, "but I would have expected a bit more control over the environment for someone in my position." The other guests were now openly staring. Sarah Matthews looked particularly shocked, her eyebrows raised in disbelief. The comedian, James Walsh, was shaking his head almost imperceptibly. Graham took a deep breath, his television experience telling him to try one more time to salvage the situation. "Harry, I think perhaps we should focus on the wonderful work your foundation is doing. Our viewers would love to hear about how they can get involved." But Harry had moved on to another complaint. "Speaking of the audience, I noticed when I came out that the applause seemed rather lackluster. Was the audience properly briefed about the significance of tonight's appearance?" This was the moment when Graham Norton, beloved by millions for his kindness and professionalism, finally began to show cracks in his composure. His smile became noticeably more forced, and when he spoke, there was a slight edge to his usually warm voice. "The audience was briefed exactly as they always are, and I thought their welcome was quite lovely, actually." "Well, I suppose you would think that," Harry said dismissively. "But coming from appearances on American television, where there's a proper understanding of protocol, the difference is quite stark." The studio had become so quiet that the hum of the cameras was audible. Graham's other guests looked like they wanted to disappear into the sofa cushions. Even the crew members, usually focused on their technical duties, were stealing glances at the increasingly hostile exchange. Graham Norton had interviewed thousands of celebrities over his career. He had handled drunken actors, emotional breakdowns, and even the occasional difficult diva. But never, in all his years behind that desk, had he encountered such breathtaking entitlement from someone who should have been grateful for the platform. "I see," Graham said quietly, his famous warmth now completely absent from his voice. "And how exactly should we have prepared differently for your appearance tonight?" It was a question that would prove to be the catalyst for what happened next. Harry's response would cross a line that even the most patient host in television could not ignore, setting the stage for a confrontation that would make broadcast history. Harry leaned back in his chair with a smirk that made every person in that studio uncomfortable. "Well, Graham, perhaps your production team should have researched proper royal protocol before booking someone of my caliber. This isn't some local morning show." The words hung in the air like poison. Graham Norton, who had spent decades making celebrities feel welcome and comfortable, felt something snap inside him. His jaw tightened almost imperceptibly, but his voice remained controlled. "Someone of your caliber?" Graham repeated slowly. "Harry, you're a guest on this show, just like everyone else who sits on this sofa." "Just like everyone else?" Harry's voice rose with indignation. "I think you're forgetting exactly who you're speaking to here. I'm not some reality television star desperate for publicity." Sarah Matthews audibly gasped. James Walsh looked like he'd rather be anywhere else in the world. The audience sat in stunned silence, watching what felt like a car crash in slow motion. Graham's famous composure was cracking. "No, you're absolutely right. You're not a reality television star. You're someone who should understand basic courtesy and respect for other people." "Courtesy?" Harry stood up abruptly from the sofa, towering over the seated host. "You want to lecture me about courtesy? Your staff treated me like any ordinary guest from the moment I arrived. No proper greeting, no acknowledgement of protocol, no recognition whatsoever of my status. The camera operators didn't know where to focus. This was uncharted territory in live television." Graham remained seated, but his voice carried a steel edge that viewers had never heard before. "Your status," Graham said quietly, "doesn't give you the right to be rude to my staff, my other guests, or my audience." "Rude?" Harry's voice cracked with disbelief. "I've been nothing but clear about my expectations. If that threatens your little television ego, perhaps you should reconsider who you book on your show." That was it. The line had been crossed so completely that there was no way back. Graham Norton stood up slowly, his face flushed, but his voice deadly calm. "My television ego?" Graham repeated. "Harry, I've been doing this job for over 20 years. I've interviewed royalty, presidents, and the biggest stars in the world. And not once, not ever, has anyone spoken to me, my guests, or my audience with such breathtaking arrogance." "Arrogance?" Harry stepped closer, his voice rising to a level that made the other guests visibly flinch. "How dare you accuse me of arrogance? Do you have any idea what I've sacrificed for this country? What my family has given?" "I know exactly what your family has given," Graham shot back, his Irish accent becoming more pronounced as his anger grew. And right now, you're disrespecting every bit of that legacy with your behavior tonight. The studio was electric with tension. The audience members were leaning forward in their seats, unable to believe what they were witnessing. This wasn't just a difficult interview anymore. This was a full-blown confrontation between one of Britain's most beloved television hosts and a member of the royal family. "You have no right to speak about my family's legacy," Harry snarled. "You're nothing but a talk show host who makes jokes for a living." Graham's eyes flashed with genuine anger. "You're right, I am a talk show host, and this is my show, which means I decide who gets to sit on that sofa and who doesn't." "Are you threatening me?" Harry demanded, his voice now loud enough that the audience didn't need microphones to hear every word. "I'm not threatening anyone," Graham replied, his voice growing steadier as he made his decision. "I'm telling you that your behavior tonight has been completely unacceptable, and I won't tolerate it for another second." Harry laughed, but there was no humor in it. "You won't tolerate it? Who do you think you are?" "I'm the host of this show," Graham said firmly, "and you're no longer welcome on it." The words hit the studio like a physical blow. Sarah Matthews covered her mouth with both hands. James Walsh sat frozen, his eyes wide with shock. The audience didn't make a sound, as if collectively holding their breath. Harry stared at Graham in complete disbelief. "Excuse me?" "You heard me perfectly well," Graham said, his voice now carrying the authority that had made him one of television's most respected figures. "Your behavior tonight has been insulting to my other guests, dismissive of my audience, and disrespectful to my staff. I'm asking you to leave." "You're asking me to leave?" Harry's voice was incredulous. "Do you understand what you're doing right now?" "I understand exactly what I'm doing," Graham replied without hesitation. "I'm protecting the integrity of this show and the respect owed to everyone else in this studio." Harry looked around wildly, as if expecting someone to intervene on his behalf. The crew members avoided his gaze, focusing intently on their equipment. His fellow guests remained silent, clearly supporting Graham's decision through their body language. "This is absolutely outrageous," Harry declared, his voice shaking with rage. "You cannot treat me this way. Do you know what this will mean for your career?" Graham's response was swift and devastating. "My career will be just fine, thank you. I've built it on treating people with respect and expecting the same in return, something you might want to consider learning." "You'll regret this," Harry said, pointing his finger at Graham with barely controlled fury. "You have no idea what you've just done." "What I've done," Graham said calmly, "is exactly what any decent host would do when faced with a guest who thinks their title gives them permission to treat other people badly." The confrontation had reached its peak. Harry stood there, chest heaving with anger, clearly realizing that his threats and intimidation tactics had failed completely. Graham Norton, meanwhile, stood his ground with quiet dignity, supported by an entire studio of people who had witnessed his guests' appalling behavior. "Security?" Graham called out clearly, his voice carrying across the studio. "Could you please escort our guest from the building?" Two security guards appeared almost immediately, having clearly been alerted by the production team as the situation escalated. They approached respectfully, but firmly. "Sir," one of them said politely to Harry, "if you could please come with us." Harry looked at the security guards, then back at Graham, then at the shocked faces of the other guests and audience members. For a moment, it seemed like he might try to argue further, but perhaps finally recognizing that he had lost this battle completely, he straightened his jacket with sharp, angry movements. "This isn't over," he said to Graham, his voice low and threatening. "Yes, it is," Graham replied simply, "and it should never have started in the first place." As the security guards gently but firmly guided Harry toward the exit, the entire studio watched in absolute silence. The man who had entered with such confidence and entitlement was leaving in disgrace, escorted out like any other disruptive member of the public. The studio doors closed behind him with a soft click that somehow sounded like thunder in the silent space. Graham Norton stood alone at the center of his set, having just done something unprecedented in television history. He had kicked a member of the royal family off his show, and he had done it with the dignity and class that had made him beloved by millions. "Well," Graham said finally, his voice still slightly shaky from adrenaline but regaining its characteristic warmth, "that was certainly unexpected." The audience erupted into the loudest, longest applause of the evening, a standing ovation that seemed to go on forever. Sarah Matthews and James Walsh joined in, both looking relieved and impressed by their host's handling of the situation. Graham Norton had faced down entitled arrogance with quiet dignity, and in doing so, had reminded everyone watching exactly why he remained television's most respected host. The man who built his career on kindness had shown that sometimes true kindness means refusing to enable bad behavior, no matter who is displaying it.